Hey, welcome back. Right, today we've got a Merlin Models McQuarrie X Wing that I've done a load of mods on, mainly because the client wants to travel with this. So what did I do? I'll give you a quick rundown. I remade these wings in acrylic sheet. On the inside here, if I take out this stand connection, which is an old SDS chuck assembly from a drill. We like that, it's a good one. Take this out, you can see the acrylic armature that I've put in here with the connection points for all the wiring for the engines. We could have used tiny micro connectors, but really they're not, you know, I don't want to be breaking this thing apart to replace bits that are not tough enough to take it, because this has got to come apart and travel. So instead of doing that, in here we've got connectors that have been taken out of an extension lead, you know, a usual home extension lead, and I've repurposed them inside this armature in acrylic so that I can see what's going on. And then on the ends of the wings here, you might be able to notice that these are the ends of plugs. I think a plug socket is probably the most robust electrical connection that I could think of. It goes through thousands of cycles in its lifetime. So now we've got the wing assembly with magnets to put a little bit of hold on it. So then we have a good robust connection, completely rebuilt wings out of acrylic because we don't want any drooping. Inside the engines, I did a ton of work because on the sketch, on the McQuarrie sketch, this front section across here isn't tapered. It's parallel down that front edge, but the wings are actually tapered. So you've got a tapered wing with a square frontage on it, which means that this needed adjusting to get that square and this square with that and this square with this bottom surface, because it's been modelled to be at an angle. So I've had to increase the thickness on this edge here by 2 mil. Just to rotate that and pull it back into square again. Then what I've done on the inside, I don't know if you can see, let me take it off. So what I've done on the inside here is we've taken away this bulkhead so you can see right through the engine, and I've made like a compression tube or collector at the back there with a little piece of real old school vintage cool shade on the back. Then on the McQuarrie sketch, I've got an actual print, which is really nice. And you can see there's a little detail on the inside here, which looks to be something along these lines. So I've modelled something and cut that from Perspex. And then I've added all these small 3mm pieces of T-section just to give a bit of detail there. And then on the front of the McQuarrie sketch, the engine doesn't actually look like that. There's a chamfer that runs on the inside edge here, which is painted a sort of tan colour. I found that the bottom of a Tamiya spray can is the perfect diameter for that recess. So this is the bottom that I cut off a Tamiya spray can, little Tamiya can. This fits snugly into that at the front there. So I made a mould of that. And then I made castings of that ring, and now these fit into the front here. They've got to be trimmed to length, obviously, but you can see now that that bezel on the front of that leads into those T-strips at the back there, and it looks actually quite cool. Now the top one also has like a squiggle detail on it. So I've made these little pieces in Perspex and etched them. That sits into the top of there to give me that detail that sits behind the bezel. You end up with something like that. There are details which run either side of this vertical vein here, and they run like that, and then there's another detail that runs on this edge to give you what you see on the sketch, and they just simply pop back in there. I completely remade this cockpit cover purely because the one that came with it was just a bit too chunky for my tastes, and there was details on the inside of the frame here that don't exist on the reference, and there were panel cuts in the side of the cockpit here that also didn't exist on the reference. So I'm remaking the canopy in 1mm plastic card. I've made these little nibs at the top smaller. They're still there. So on the inside there's another layer of 1mm plastic card, and that forms the frame that you can see around the inside of the thing. I've left gaps so that this can fold together and then be glued in place and then filled on the inside. And now I've got to see whether it fits on the top of this fuselage. So I'm expecting there'll be a few trims to do.
We're getting a picture on the TV. Neil Armstrong on the porch. It's 109 hours. It's 19 minutes.
These little panels that stick out on the side of the fuselage were actually in the wrong place on the model, and if I'd painted it to match the reference, which is this beautiful print, we will notice that none of these markings appear above the top of that grey line. So all these markings had to be removed and shifted down, and then the panels put back on within the space for this grey line here to match the reference. The engines themselves on the back end, they would look too chunky. The engines were too high. They stuck up like crazy on the top here, and it just made the back end not very elegant. So I dropped these engines down by about 8mm, just to give them a bit more of a line that matched the reference, with a little bit of detail showing at the front as opposed to like half that. And then on the back end, I made new turkey feathers cast from the long turkey feathers from the original X-Wing, just to bring the two into line, because this will be shown next to a traditional X-Wing which has these, and I want the parts that are cast on the original one to match the same size cast parts as on this one. So the small heat sinks that exist inside the engines are now exactly the same as the original heat sinks on the X-Wing, which I think ties the two together nicely. There's acrylic cut pieces in there to add detail to the engines, so they look less like an LED and a little bit more like a diffused light with detail in there. Underneath the R2 dome is a push on-off switch, just here. Turns the electrics off, turns the electrics on, all self-contained inside it. The fit in here was sloppy, to say the least. So I was thinking of re-drilling that out to put a ferrule inside and then have a connection with a magnet so these could come off for travel. But then I kind of thought, well, I'll put a little bit of resin in the hole, push it in until it starts to fill it up, and now I've got an airtight seal on it. So now I can push that in there and know that it's not going to fall out because there's a vacuum mold in it. It's an absolutely perfect fit. This is the original cap for the rear end, okay? I've cast that so that I can make a copy with a hole in it, so that the client can either mount it from this bottom mount, which I've drilled out, yet to finish, or the rear mount. So that allows the rear mount to fit onto there. When you get this thing lined up, there was a huge sharp step on the bottom here. Yeah, I didn't like it. So I've radiused this edge, sanded it all down, and just sort of etched in the details again with a file, just so that gives a slightly more cohesive look to the back end there. Right, because I've got magnets on the back here and 2 locating spigots, I can snap this section on the back. I've already filled a little element of it. This is the final skim to try and get the thing to line up properly. Just cut a couple of little thin strips out of plastic card for the application. And what I'm going to do is just go straight over the top of that, make sure I've got my lines lined up on the side. But I'm just going straight over the top of that, over the top of the tape and the top of the part, because I want that edge to match. Now I'm not worried about putting too much on here. So what this is going to allow us to do is to get a perfect blending of those 2 surfaces without the hassle. And I'm not trying to generate a perfect surface with this. I'm just making sure I've got enough meat in my burger. Okay, so now I'm going to let that go off. Okay, so let's just run that down the edge. Doesn't matter if I'm a bit on the masking, that's fine. Alright, so now we should have this filler on here, should be the thickness plus a bit more of this tape, thicker than the area that we want to match it to. So that's fine, we've got a bit more meat on the back end of that. So now I can offer this back up. And I can see how much I've got to take. The way you might be able to see better. How much I've got to take off this top surface here. And the same on this side for these 2 to match up perfectly. So a bit of a pain in the arse, but it's going to look way better when all those bits line up. Just slowly creeping down to the right kind of level. Trying to keep this file parallel to the surface of this. Taking it down nicely. We're getting closer. Just now painting individual panels a fraction different. I'm trying to get different surface textures on a few of these. Some will be more glossy, some will be more matte. So they all fit together and aren't too crazy. The orange is a mix of red and yellow matte. And the reason I do that is because I put that on at different densities. And it gives you very slight variation in the orange colour without having a difference in actual paint. So the darker orange is a thicker pass than the lighter orange. The lighter orange comes out yellowish. You should try that. You can vary the colour on your panels with one airbrush fill just by varying the intensity that you put it onto the surface. So hey, that's another little thing. It's going to be slightly different than a Star Wars paint job because I want this to be a bit more real world. So we're going for nice and neat lines and stuff on this. There'll be a few washes and a few little sanding, and then we're going to go over with thousands of tiny little masks to give the rivets on each panel. So looking at the reference, there's an orange stripe here. This is where all the discrepancies in the models start to make themselves shown when you try to match things up. So because this line is slightly too high and the angle of this is wrong, I didn't want to fudge this line and pull it down to the back here, because that would have thrown out all the panel lines and everything else, which would have made it look a bit weird. There's two sketches for this X-Wing that we're working with. One's a front view and one's a rear 3/4 view. The two have obviously got very slight differences in them because they're just sketches. So it's an interpretation more than anything else, but I've got to put in here an orange stripe down this side. I know I'm going to have to go over these panels somewhere, and it should sit flush with the back of this gun. So I think I'm going to run it here, but I might run it further down to this edge, just because I think it will match the reference better. Now what I'm going to do is just put the wings back in it to see how things are going, what it looks like. And because yeah, I'm getting bored of painting, I want to see what it looks like back together. So okay, so what I'm doing here now is on the edge of these panels we want more detail, which means I need rivets around here, but the scale of this model means these rivets are going to be very, very small. I've already applied some to this panel here. I don't know if you can see that, but there's some very light grey rivets over the top of the edge of that panel. So I've cut loads of masks of varying pitches, sizes, some square ones, some circular ones and some thin lines. I'm going to use those masks to go around the edge of the panels, but what I'm going to do is put the rivets on just in paint. So it gives you an incredibly thin surface relief on the panel that the weathering's going to use to catch. And the way that I'm going to spray these, I'll show you in a minute, is I'm going to shadow one side of the thing and then attack it from the opposite side to give a shadow to the edge of each one of the rivets. But I don't want them really in your face. I want them super subtle, just so you can hardly see them until you get close, and then you get a different reflection of them. So I've got my piece of laser cut masking here with some very tiny holes in it, and I'm going to try and position those along the edge of that panel. But what I'm trying to do is get the final 2 dots that appear on that panel to be equidistant from the ends of the panel, and also the same distance away from this edge, so I can get one continuous square running round. So I'm looking at the pitch on that one and the pitch on this one. So I think we are about on the money there. Now I can see through the mask the edge of the panel that I'm trying to follow, so I know that those dots sit the same distance in from the edge as the dots on the panel next to it, this one here. It's a little high, so I'm just going to drop that a fraction. I think, am I there? Yeah, I think that'll do us. Right, so now I only want to spray this set of holes on this white panel here, so I put a simple mask around the rest of it to block it off. Okay, so that's the panel mask, just revealing the rivets that I want to put in along the edge of that grey line on the white panel. So to get these to look half decent, first of all I'm going to go in with a dark-ish grey. I'm going in first with an automotive grey primer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot this primer at an angle across the face of this, because ideally I just want to catch the edges of that mask. So just a very thin dust at a really extreme angle, because I want there to be a build-up of paint on one side of that mask if I can. Then I'm going to go back in with the same base coat as the panel underneath it, but I'm going to spray it from this angle. Okay, so I'm going to have to move this a little bit so I can get my hand in there. Hope that's not too disorientating. Okay, so we're going from an extreme angle on this side now, with the same base colour as the panel underneath that mask. Okay, so now, if you can hear me over that aeroplane, there's quite a heavy build-up of paint now on the side opposite the grey. So when I reveal this masking, there should be a grey edge to each one of those rivets, but the grey edge should be more prominent on this side, on the left-hand side as you're looking at it. So let's see if that worked. Right, so those are my rivets. They look pretty good. You can see there's a little bit of shading to one side of those rivets. They're super subtle, but you get the idea. And that should give us a more realistic look once I get the weathering on. What I'm going to do now is apply the same process with a few different sized rivets and a few different spaced rivets all over the model on panels that I think need it, especially on the bottom here, because most of them will be removable for servicing. Top of the fuselage, not so many rivets, but there will be some. So here we go, this is the rivet marathon.
Express yourself. Express yourself. Express yourself. Express yourself. Express yourself. Express yourself.
I hope you like it. Loads more models to come. Got the pulse rifle mission back on now, so keep your eyes peeled if you want to see what's going on next. Thanks for watching, everybody. Like and subscribe if you would. That would really help me out. And I'll see you next time. Cheers, guys.